The scorching Arizona sun beat down relentlessly as Hannah Taylor clutched her empty canteen, her chapped lips trembling with each labored breath. She had been traveling for days through the unforgiving terrain, her supplies dwindling to nothing, her horse lost to a rattlesnake strike 3 days prior. The year was 1877, and the promise of a new life teaching at the schoolhouse in Utica, Arizona Territory, had drawn her west from Boston, a journey that now threatened to be her last. Hannah's vision blurred as the distant mountains seemed to shimmer and dance in the heat. Her throat felt like sandpaper, each swallow more painful than the last. The worn leather of her boots had rubbed raw blisters on her feet, and her once pristine blue traveling dress was now coated with a fine layer of red dust. She stumbled forward, determined to reach the next settlement before nightfall, but her body had other plans. "Just a little further," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. The trail ahead stretched endlessly, mocking her determination with its vastness. As the sun reached its zenith, Hannah felt her knees buckle beneath her. The ground rushed up to meet her, and darkness claimed her consciousness. Samuel Orton pulled his hat lower over his eyes, shielding them from the relentless sun as he guided his horse along the narrow trail. He'd been on the move for nearly a week, driving a small herd of cattle to a ranch near Prescott. At 32, Sam had spent most of his adult life as a cowboy, drifting from ranch to ranch across the Arizona Territory. His weathered face and calloused hands told the story of a man who lived under the open sky, answering to no one but himself and the changing seasons. He was ahead of schedule, having pushed the herd harder than usual to avoid the worst of the summer heat. Now, with his job complete and payment secure in his saddlebag, he was taking the long way back to Utica, where he occasionally picked up work at the Miller Ranch. The trail was quiet, save for the rhythmic hoofbeats of his chestnut gelding, Thunder, and the occasional call of a distant hawk. As he rounded a bend in the trail, something unusual caught his eye, a splash of faded blue against the red earth. Squinting against the sun's glare, Sam realized with a jolt that it was a person lying motionless on the ground. He urged Thunder forward, closing the distance quickly. "Hello," he called out, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "Can you hear me?" The figure didn't respond. Drawing closer, Sam saw it was a woman, her face flushed an angry red from sun exposure. Her light brown hair had partly come loose from its pins, spilling across the dusty ground. He knelt beside her, gently turning her onto her back. "Madam, can you hear me?" He pressed his fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, weak and rapid, but present. Her skin burned hot to the touch, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. Heat exhaustion, possibly moving into heat stroke. Sam had seen it before in greenhorns who underestimated the desert. He glanced around, seeing no sign of a horse or traveling companions. Just an empty canteen lying a few feet away. With practiced efficiency, Sam uncorked his own water supply and carefully dribbled a small amount between the woman's parched lips. Too much too fast could make her sick, but she desperately needed hydration. "That's it," he murmured as she stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "Easy now." The woman coughed weakly, her eyes opening just enough to reveal hazel irises before closing again. Sam frowned, assessing the situation. The nearest settlement was Coyote Springs, a small mining town, but it was at least 3 days' ride from their current position. The woman was in no condition to ride, and leaving her here while he went for help wasn't an option. Making his decision, Sam fashioned a small shelter using his bedroll to shield her from the direct sunlight. He loosened her clothing where it was proper to do so, the high collar of her dress and the tight buttons at her wrists, and continued to give her small sips of water. As dusk approached, he built a small fire and prepared a thin broth from his supplies. "Madam," he said softly, trying to rouse her again, "I need you to drink some of this broth if you can." Her eyes opened more fully this time, confusion evident in her gaze as she tried to focus on his face. "Where?" She managed, her voice a painful rasp. "You're about 50 miles east of Coyote Springs," Sam explained, holding the tin cup to her lips. "I found you collapsed on the trail. You're suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration." She took a small sip of the broth, wincing as it passed her raw throat. "Hannah," she whispered. "My name is Hannah Taylor." "Samuel Orton," he replied with a nod. "Most folks call me Sam. Can you tell me what happened to your horse, Miss Taylor?" "Rattlesnake," she murmured, her eyes drifting closed again. "3 days ago I thought I could make it on foot." Sam's expression grew grim. 3 days on foot in this terrain with limited water was a death sentence for anyone, let alone a woman who clearly wasn't accustomed to the harsh realities of the Arizona desert. She was lucky to have survived this long. "Rest now, Miss Taylor," he said, setting aside the cup after she'd managed a few more sips. "We'll head for Coyote Springs at first light." As Hannah drifted back into unconsciousness, Sam considered his options. Thunder was a strong horse, but carrying double would slow them considerably, especially in this heat. And the woman was in no condition to ride on her own, even if he had a second mount. There was only one viable choice, and it wasn't going to be easy for either of them. When dawn broke the next morning, Sam had already packed his supplies and readied Thunder for the journey. Hannah was more alert but still dangerously weak. He helped her sit up, supporting her back as she drank more water and broth. "Miss Taylor, I need to get you to Coyote Springs," he explained, his voice gentle but firm. "It's a 3-day journey from here. You can't walk and you can't ride on your own in your condition." Hannah nodded weakly, her face still flushed with fever. "How will we manage?" "I'm going to carry you," Sam said simply. "Thunder will carry our supplies and I'll carry you. We'll make better time that way and you'll conserve your strength." Her eyes widened slightly. That's not necessary." "I can try to, with all due respect, Miss Taylor. You'd collapse again within the hour," Sam interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "I've carried calves heavier than you across difficult terrain. We don't have many options if we want to reach help before your condition worsens." Hannah looked as though she wanted to protest further, but the simple effort of sitting upright had already drained what little energy she had. She nodded reluctantly. "Thank you, Mr. Orton," she whispered. Sam fashioned a sling from one of his spare shirts, creating a way to distribute Hannah's weight more comfortably across his back. He helped her stand, steadying her as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. "Put your arms around my neck," he instructed, crouching slightly. With careful movements, he lifted her, adjusting until her weight settled against his back. She was lighter than he'd expected, though still a substantial burden for a 3-day journey. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, securing the makeshift sling. "As much as I can be," Hannah replied, her voice close to his ear. "I'm sorry to be such a burden." "No need for apologies, Miss Taylor. We all need help sometimes." With Hannah secure, Sam took Thunder's reins and began walking. He set a steady pace, mindful of conserving his own energy for the long journey ahead. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching day. "May I ask what brings you to this part of the territory?" Sam asked after they'd been traveling for nearly an hour, partly to distract Hannah from her discomfort and partly out of genuine curiosity. Hannah's voice was stronger now, the water and broth having eased her parched throat somewhat. "I accepted a position as a teacher in Utica. The school board sent funds for my journey, but I'm afraid I was woefully unprepared for the realities of travel in this region. Sam nodded, though she couldn't see his face from her position. Utica's a decent town, small but growing. They've been trying to get a proper school established for the past year or so. The children there could use a good education. Do you live in Utica, Mr. Orton? Not exactly. I work the ranches in the area when they need extra hands. The rest of the time, I'm on the move. Just delivered a small herd to a ranch near Prescott. As they continued their journey, the conversation flowed more easily. Hannah spoke of her life in Boston, where she'd taught at a girls' school for 3 years after completing her own education. She described her elderly parents and how they'd reluctantly blessed her decision to seek adventure and purpose in the West. My father said I had too much spirit to remain in Boston society, she admitted with a touch of pride in her voice. My mother feared I'd never find a husband if I ventured west, but I told her I wasn't seeking a husband, I was seeking a life. Sam chuckled at that. And has your first taste of Western life lived up to your expectations? There was a brief silence before Hannah replied, her voice tinged with rueful humor. Not exactly. I didn't expect to be carried across the desert by a stranger after nearly dying of thirst. Well, the West has a way of surprising folks, Sam said, for better or worse. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Sam found a small outcropping of rocks that provided minimal shade and carefully set Hannah down. She was running a fever again, her face flushed despite the water he'd been giving her at regular intervals. We'll rest here until the worst of the heat passes, he decided, helping her lean against the rocks. He dampened a bandana with precious water and gently pressed it to her forehead. Try to drink a little more. Hannah took the canteen with trembling hands. Thank you, she murmured. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. No need, Sam replied, busying himself with checking Thunder's hooves to hide his discomfort with her gratitude. He wasn't accustomed to being thanked. Most of his interactions with others were brief and transactional work performed for wages paid. As they rested, Sam shared some jerky and hardtack from his supplies. Hannah managed a few small bites, which he considered a good sign. Her strength was returning, if slowly. Have you always been a cowboy? She asked, watching as he adjusted Thunder's saddle to ensure the horse remained comfortable with his load. Sam nodded. Since I was 16. My father had a small ranch in Texas, but it wasn't enough to support all of us after the war. I headed west to find work and never looked back. Do you have family waiting for you somewhere? The question was innocent, but it stirred old memories Sam preferred to keep buried. Not anymore, he said simply, his tone making it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. Hannah seemed to sense his reluctance and changed the subject. Tell me about Utica. What should I expect when I arrive? Grateful for the diversion, Sam described the small town with its single main street, the general store run by the widow Mrs. Jenkins, the saloon that doubled as a gathering place for the community, and the half-built schoolhouse that had been awaiting a teacher for months. The town's mostly ranchers, a few miners and their families, he explained. Good people, most of them. They've been saving up for a proper school for years. The children have been taught by whoever had the time and inclination, usually Mrs. Jenkins or Pastor Wilson. How many students will I have? Hannah asked, her professional interest clearly piqued despite her condition. Maybe 15 or 20. Ranging from little ones to teenagers. Some of the ranch children ride in from miles around. When the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Sam helped Hannah back into the carrying position, and they resumed their journey. He walked until well after dusk, using the light of the rising moon to guide their path. By the time he finally stopped to make camp, Hannah had fallen asleep against his back, her head resting on his shoulder. He set her down as gently as possible on his bedroll, then tended to thunder before building a small fire. The desert night had turned cool, a stark contrast to the day's heat. Sam covered Hannah with his spare blanket, then sat beside the fire, preparing a more substantial meal than they'd had at midday. The smell of cooking beans and bacon roused Hannah from her sleep. She sat up slowly, looking disoriented for a moment before her gaze settled on Sam. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "Few hours," Sam replied, stirring the contents of the small pot suspended over the fire. "How are you feeling?" "Better, I think. Still weak, but not as feverish." She attempted to smooth her crumpled dress, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. "I must look a fright." Sam glanced up from the fire, taking in her tangled hair, sunburned face, and dust-covered clothes. "You look like someone who survived what would have killed most city folk," he said honestly. "That's nothing to be ashamed of." Hannah's lips curved into a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing a warmth to her hazel eyes that made Sam look away quickly, an unfamiliar feeling stirring in his chest. "I suppose that's a compliment out here," she said. "One of the highest," Sam confirmed, dishing up a plate of beans and passing it to her. "Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to readjust." They ate in comfortable silence, the night alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures going about their business. The star-filled sky stretched above them, more vast and clear than Hannah had ever seen in Boston. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. "I've never seen so many stars." Sam followed her gaze. "That's one thing the West has plenty of space and sky, makes a man feel small. But free," Hannah added softly. Sam looked at her with newfound interest. Most Eastern women he'd encountered viewed the vastness of the frontier as threatening rather than liberating. "Yes," he agreed. "Free." The next morning they set out before dawn to make the most of the cooler hours. Hannah insisted on trying to walk alongside Sam, but after less than half a mile, it was clear she still lacked the strength. Without comment, Sam lifted her onto his back once more, and they continued their journey. As the second day progressed, Hannah's condition improved noticeably. Her fever broke completely by midday, and she was able to hold longer conversations without tiring. Sam found himself sharing more about his life than he typically did with strangers, telling her about his years working cattle drives across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, the characters he'd met along the way, and the places he'd seen. In turn, Hannah spoke of her dreams for the school in Utica, her passion for education, and her determination to prove that women could thrive in the frontier just as well as men given the chance. "Though I must admit," she added with a self-deprecating laugh, "my current situation doesn't make a very convincing argument for my case." "Don't judge yourself too harshly," Sam replied. "Even experienced frontiersmen die of thirst out here. The desert doesn't discriminate between men and women when it comes to killing." By the evening of the second day, they had made good progress, covering more ground than Sam had initially hoped. They made camp near a small spring, a rare blessing in this arid landscape. Sam helped Hannah to the water's edge, where she was able to wash her face and hands, sighing with relief as the cool water soothed her sunburned skin. While Hannah refreshed herself, Sam kept a respectful distance, busying himself with setting up camp and tending to thunder. When he heard her approaching, he looked up, momentarily taken aback. With the dust and grime washed away and her hair neatly plaited over one shoulder, Hannah's natural beauty was evident despite her ordeal. Her hazel eyes, no longer dulled by exhaustion, caught the light of the setting sun, flecked with gold. "That feels much better," she said, seemingly unaware of his scrutiny. I haven't felt human in days. Sam cleared his throat. There's plenty of water here if you'd like to wash more thoroughly, he said, avoiding her eyes. I can give you privacy. Hannah blushed slightly. That would be most appreciated, Mr. Orton. Sam, he corrected automatically. After carrying you for 2 days, I reckon we can dispense with formalities, Miss Taylor. Hannah, she offered in return, a shy smile playing at her lips. Sam nodded, gathering his rifle. I'll scout the area and check for game. Take your time. Just call if you need anything. He disappeared into the gathering dusk, giving Hannah the privacy she needed. When he returned an hour later with a pair of rabbits for their dinner, he found her sitting by the fire she'd managed to build in his absence. Her dress, though still worn and travel-stained, looked neater, and her damp hair hung loose around her shoulders, drying in the warm evening air. You didn't have to cook, Sam said as he sat down to prepare the rabbits. You should be resting. I've rested enough, Hannah replied firmly. And you've been carrying me for 2 days. The least I can do is tend the fire and help with the meal. Sam didn't argue, recognizing the determined set of her jaw. As they worked together, Sam skinning and cleaning the rabbits, Hannah preparing the few vegetables they had left, a comfortable rhythm developed between them. By the time the stew was simmering over the fire, the awkwardness had dissipated, replaced by an easy companionship that surprised them both. We should reach Coyote Springs by tomorrow afternoon, Sam said as they ate. It's not much of a town, but they have a doctor of sorts, old fellow who patched up miners before he took to drink. He still knows his medicine, though. Hannah nodded, her expression thoughtful. And from there to Utica. Another 4 days' ride if you're well enough. I can arrange for a wagon if needed. You've already done so much, Hannah protested. Surely you have your own business to attend to. I couldn't ask you to escort me all the way to Utica. Sam shrugged, feigning nonchalance. I was headed that way regardless, and I wouldn't feel right sending you off with strangers after all this. The truth, which he was reluctant to admit even to himself, was that he was in no hurry to part ways with Hannah Taylor. Something about her quiet strength and determined spirit had caught his interest in a way no woman had in years. Well then, I accept your escort, Sam, Hannah said, her use of his given name sending an unexpected warmth through him. And I promise not to be such a burden for the remainder of the journey. You're not a burden, Hannah, he said quietly, meeting her gaze across the fire. Not at all. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Hannah was the first to look away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. We should rest, Sam said, breaking the tension. Tomorrow will be another long day. He prepared their sleeping arrangements, placing his bedroll on one side of the fire and fashioning a makeshift bed for himself on the other. As they settled down for the night, Hannah's voice drifted softly through the darkness. Sam. Yes, thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for treating me with such respect. I know it's not conventional, our situation. Sam stared up at the stars, considering his words carefully. Out here, conventional doesn't matter much. What matters is doing right by people, getting home safe. Is that what Utica is to you? Home, the question caught him off guard. I don't rightly know, he admitted after a long pause. Never stayed in one place long enough to call it home. Perhaps it's time you did, Hannah murmured, her voice growing drowsy. Everyone needs somewhere to belong. Sam didn't respond, but her words lingered in his mind long after her breathing had deepened into sleep. Home was a concept he'd abandoned years ago, along with any notions of settling down. Yet as he watched Hannah's peaceful form in the dim light of the dying fire, he found himself wondering what it might be like to have someone to come home to. The third day dawned clear and marginally cooler than the previous ones. Hannah insisted on attempting to walk again, and this time she managed nearly 2 miles before fatigue forced her to accept Sam's assistance. Even then, she was able to ride on Thunder for short stretches, giving Sam a much-needed respite from carrying her. As they traveled, the landscape gradually began to change, the barren desert giving way to scattered vegetation and more frequent signs of wildlife. By mid-afternoon, they crested a small rise, and the settlement of Coyote Springs came into view in the valley below a cluster of weathered buildings surrounding a central street, with the head frames of several mines visible on the surrounding hillsides. "Not much to look at," Sam commented, "but they've got what we need: doctor, hotel, and a general store where you can get some fresh clothes." Hannah nodded, relief evident in her expression. "It looks like paradise to me right now." As they descended toward the town, Sam found himself oddly reluctant to reach their destination. The past 3 days had created a bond between them, forged through shared hardship and growing mutual respect. In town, surrounded by other people, and the trappings of civilization, however rudimentary, things would inevitably change. They drew curious stares as they made their way down the main street, a dust-covered cowboy leading his horse, with a disheveled but clearly educated woman walking beside him. Sam directed them straight to a small building with a faded sign declaring Dr. H. Morgan, physician and surgeon. The doctor, a grizzled man in his 60s with rheumy eyes and hands that trembled slightly, examined Hannah thoroughly while Sam waited outside. When she emerged, there was color in her cheeks and a smile on her face. "Dr. Morgan says I'm recovering well," she reported. "He's given me some powders for strength and advised plenty of rest and fluids, but he sees no reason why I can't continue to Utica after a day or two of recovery." Sam nodded, relieved. "Good. I've arranged rooms at the hotel across the street, and the general store is still open if you'd like to purchase some necessities." They spent the remainder of the afternoon addressing their immediate needs. Hannah selected a new dress and basic toiletries at the general store, while Sam replenished their supplies and arranged for a horse and small wagon for the journey to Utica. By evening, they were settled in the hotel's small dining room, enjoying their first proper meal in days. "It feels strange to be sitting at a table again," Hannah remarked, smoothing the skirt of her new blue calico dress. She had bathed and pinned up her hair, transforming once more into the proper schoolteacher she was meant to be. "After sleeping under the stars, this place seems almost confining." Sam, who had likewise cleaned up, his usually unruly dark hair slicked back and his face cleanly shaved, nodded in understanding. "The wilderness gets in your blood after a while, makes it hard to feel comfortable with walls around you. Is that why you've never settled in one place?" Hannah asked, her head tilted slightly in curiosity. Sam considered the question as he cut into his steak. "Partly," he admitted, "but mostly I just never found a reason compelling enough to stay put." Hannah's gaze was thoughtful. "And what would constitute a compelling reason in your estimation?" Their eyes met across the table, and Sam felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed during their journey. Before he could formulate a response, they were interrupted by the arrival of the hotel owner, a jovial man named Peterson. "Everything to your satisfaction, folks?" he asked, eyeing them with open curiosity. Word of their unusual arrival had clearly spread through the small town. "Yes, thank you," Hannah replied politely. "The meal is excellent. Glad to hear it, madam. We don't get many ladies of quality passing through Coyote Springs." He turned to Sam. "Heard you're headed for Utica next. Planning to stay for the Independence Day celebration?" Sam raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize it was so close to the 4th. "Week and a half," Peterson confirmed. "Utica puts on quite a display picnic. dancing, fireworks ordered special from back east. Whole territory turns out for it. After Peterson moved on to another table, Hannah looked at Sam with renewed interest. Would we make it to Utica in time for the celebration? Easily, Sam replied. It's 4 days by wagon at a leisurely pace, less if we push it. I've never seen a frontier Independence Day celebration, Hannah said, a hint of excitement in her voice. In Boston, it's all very formal affairs with speeches and orchestras. Sam chuckled. You'll find it a bit different out here. Less speeches, more whiskey. But the sentiment's the same. As they finished their meal and prepared to retire to their respective rooms, an awkwardness descended that hadn't existed during their time on the trail. The social conventions they'd necessarily set aside during their journey reasserted themselves within the confines of civilization. Well, Hannah said as they reached the top of the stairs, I suppose this is good night. Suppose it is, Sam agreed, suddenly finding it difficult to meet her eyes. If you need anything, I'm just down the hall. Hannah hesitated, then impulsively reached out to touch his arm. Thank you again, Sam, not just for saving my life but for these past days. I've learned a great deal from you. Sam looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. The sincerity in her expression stirred something deep within him, a longing he'd thought long buried. I reckon I've learned a thing or two from you as well, Hannah. They stood there for a moment, neither willing to break the connection, until the sound of footsteps on the stairs forced them to step apart. With a final smile, Hannah disappeared into her room, leaving Sam standing in the hallway with an unfamiliar ache in his chest. The next morning, Sam met with the local blacksmith to check over the wagon he'd purchased. It was a simple vehicle with a canvas cover, nothing fancy but sturdy enough for their journey. He arranged for their departure the following day, giving Hannah another full day to rest and recover her strength. When he returned to the hotel, he found her in the small parlor writing letters. She looked up as he entered, a warm smile spreading across her face. I'm writing to my parents, she explained, setting aside her pen. Letting them know I'm safe and nearly at my destination, though I'm omitting certain details that would only worry them needlessly. Sam nodded, understanding her discretion. Probably wise. No need to mention nearly dying of thirst and being carried across the desert by a stranger. Precisely, Hannah agreed with a small laugh. How are the preparations for our departure coming along? All set for tomorrow morning, Sam reported, taking the seat opposite her. Wagon's in good condition, and I've laid in enough supplies to see us comfortably to Utica. Hannah's expression grew serious. Sam, I've been thinking about how to compensate you for all you've done. The school board provided funds for my journey, and I insist on paying you for your time and trouble. Sam frowned, shaking his head. That's not necessary. I told you before, please, Hannah interrupted, her tone firm. This isn't charity you've provided, but a service, a valuable one. I would have died out there without you, and we both know it. Allow me the dignity of paying my debt. Sam studied her determined face and realized this was important to her sense of independence. All right, he conceded, but only enough to cover the cost of the wagon and supplies, nothing more. Hannah opened her mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Very well. That seems fair. She hesitated, then added more softly, though some debts can't be measured in dollars and cents. The look that passed between them conveyed an understanding deeper than words could express. Sam was the first to break the silence, standing abruptly. I should check on Thunder, make sure he's ready for tomorrow's journey. Of course, Hannah replied, picking up her pen once more. Will you join me for dinner again this evening? I'd like that, Sam said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. That evening they dined together once more, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed the upcoming journey and their expectations of Utica. Hannah shared her plans for the school, her eyes bright with enthusiasm as she described the curriculum she hoped to implement and her dreams for her students' futures. "Education is the great equalizer," she explained passionately. "It doesn't matter if a child comes from wealth or poverty. With proper schooling, they can forge their own path in life." "You really believe that?" Sam asked, genuinely curious. "With all my heart," Hannah replied without hesitation. "Don't you?" Sam considered the question thoughtfully. "I reckon there's truth in it. My own schooling was limited just enough to read, write, and cipher. But I've known men who couldn't sign their own names who were wiser than college professors." "Book learning isn't the only kind of education," Hannah acknowledged. "Experience teaches lessons no classroom can impart. But imagine combining both practical knowledge and formal education. What couldn't a person achieve with such advantages?" Her passion was infectious, and Sam found himself drawn into her vision. "The children of Utica are fortunate to have such a dedicated teacher coming their way." Hannah blushed slightly at the compliment. "I only hope I can live up to their expectations. It's one thing to teach in an established Boston school with all the necessary resources. It's quite another to build something from the ground up. If anyone can do it, I'd wager it's you," Sam said with unexpected conviction. "You survived the desert, after all. Building a school should be simpler by comparison." Hannah laughed, the sound light and musical in the quiet dining room. "Let's hope so. Though I suspect each challenge comes with its own unique difficulties." As their meal concluded, neither seemed eager to part ways. They lingered over coffee, their conversation turning to more personal matters: childhood memories, favorite books, hopes for the future. It was the most open Sam had been with anyone in years, and he found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced aloud before. "I've always had this notion," he admitted as the evening grew late, "of finding a piece of land someday. Nothing grand, just enough for a small ranch. Somewhere with good water and grass. A place where a man could put down roots if he had a mind to." Hannah's expression softened. "That sounds lovely, Sam. Why haven't you pursued it?" Sam shrugged, uncomfortable with the vulnerability his confession had revealed. "Never seemed to be the right time, or the right place. Perhaps you haven't found the right reason yet," Hannah suggested gently, echoing their conversation from the previous evening. Their eyes met across the table, and in that moment, Sam could almost imagine a future he'd never allowed himself to consider before: a home, a purpose, someone to share it with. The intensity of the feeling unnerved him, and he looked away first. "It's getting late," he said, rising from his chair. "We should turn in if we're to make an early start tomorrow." Hannah nodded, though he sensed a hint of disappointment in her expression. "Of course. Good night, Sam." "Good night, Hannah." As he lay in his bed later that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, Sam found his thoughts returning repeatedly to Hannah. In the span of just a few days, she had somehow slipped past the carefully constructed barriers he'd maintained for years. It was unsettling, this newfound awareness of her not just as the woman he'd rescued, but as someone whose presence he'd come to value in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Dawn broke clear and cool the following morning as they prepared to depart. Sam loaded their supplies into the wagon while Hannah settled her account with the hotel and posted her letters. By the time the sun had fully risen, they were on the road. Thunder tethered to the back of the wagon as Sam handled the reins of the sturdy mare he'd purchased to pull their vehicle. "How does it feel to be traveling in relative luxury?" Sam asked as they left the outskirts of Coyote Springs behind. Hannah, seated beside him on the wagon bench, smiled. "After walking and being carried, like the height of extravagance, though I must admit I'll miss sleeping beneath the stars." "We'll still be camping along the way," Sam pointed out. "The wagon just means we'll have a proper shelter if it rains and more comfortable bedding." The first day of their journey passed pleasantly as they followed the winding trail northwest toward Utica. The landscape grew gradually more hospitable, with juniper and pine trees appearing with increasing frequency as they gained elevation. By late afternoon, they had reached a small creek where Sam suggested they make camp. "We could push on for another hour or so," he explained as he helped Hannah down from the wagon. "But this is one of the better camping spots on this stretch, good water and plenty of firewood." Hannah stretched, working out the stiffness from a day of sitting on the hard wagon bench. "It's beautiful here," she observed, taking in the clear stream and the surrounding trees. "So different from the desert where you found me." Together, they established their camp with an efficiency born of their previous days together on the trail. Sam tended to the horses while Hannah gathered firewood and prepared a cooking fire. By the time dusk fell, they had a hearty stew simmering, and the wagon arranged to provide shelter for Hannah. As they sat by the fire after their meal, Hannah gazed thoughtfully into the flames. "May I ask you something personal, Sam?" He tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Fair enough." She hesitated, then continued. "Earlier, you mentioned you had no family anymore. What happened to them?" Sam was silent for so long that Hannah began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "My father died when I was 18. Took sick after a cattle drive and never recovered. My mother followed a year later, just seemed to lose her will to live after he was gone. They loved each other fiercely." He paused, poking at the fire with a stick. "Had a younger sister, Emily. She married a man who took her to California. They died in a ferry accident on the Sacramento River 5 years back." "I'm so sorry," Hannah said softly, genuine compassion in her voice. "To lose everyone like that, it must have been devastating." Sam nodded, his expression guarded. "It was, for a while. Eventually, you learn to carry it and keep moving forward." "Is that why you never settled anywhere?" "Because there was no one to settle for." The question cut closer to the truth than Sam was comfortable acknowledging. "Maybe," he admitted reluctantly. "Never really thought of it that way." Hannah moved closer, her hand coming to rest gently on his arm. "Thank you for telling me. I know it wasn't easy." The simple touch and the understanding in her eyes broke something open inside him. Without conscious thought, Sam found himself covering her hand with his own, their fingers intertwining in the flickering firelight. "What about you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "Any family besides your parents?" Hannah shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm an only child. My parents are older. My father was 45 when I was born. They wanted me to marry a suitable Boston gentleman and give them grandchildren before it was too late, but I couldn't bring myself to accept any of my suitors." "None of them caught your interest?" A small smile played at her lips. "They were perfectly pleasant men, but there was something missing. A sense of purpose, perhaps, or passion. They seemed content with their comfortable lives, never questioning, never striving for anything beyond what was expected of them." "And that wasn't enough for you," Sam observed, understanding dawning. "No," Hannah confirmed. "I wanted more, needed more. When the opportunity to come west arose, I knew it was my chance to find whatever it was I'd been searching for." "And have you found it?" Sam asked, suddenly very aware of the closeness between them, the warmth of her hand beneath his. Hannah's gaze was steady, her voice soft but certain. "I believe I'm getting closer." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Sam found himself leaning toward her, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't resist. Hannah's eyes drifted closed as the distance between them narrowed, her breath warm against his face. The sharp crack of a branch breaking somewhere in the darkness snapped them both back to awareness. Sam was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand, as he scanned the perimeter of their camp. "What is it?" Hannah whispered, rising to stand beside him. "Probably just an animal," Sam replied, though his posture remained alert. "But best to be sure." After several tense minutes of watching and listening, he relaxed slightly. "Whatever it was, it's moved on. Still, I'll keep first watch tonight." The interruption had broken the intimate mood, and a certain awkwardness descended as they prepared for sleep. Hannah retreated to her bedding beneath the wagon, while Sam positioned himself near the fire, rifle close at hand. "Good night, Sam," Hannah called softly from her makeshift bed. "Good night, Hannah," he replied, his mind still replaying the moment by the fire and wondering what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. The next morning brought a shift in the weather, with dark clouds gathering on the horizon and a chill in the air that promised rain. They broke camp quickly, hoping to make good progress before the storm hit. By mid-morning, the first raindrops began to fall, and Sam helped Hannah into the shelter of the wagon's canvas cover before taking up the reins once more. The rain grew steadier as the day wore on, turning the trail muddy and slowing their progress considerably. By afternoon, it was clear they wouldn't reach their intended destination for the night. Sam scanned the surrounding countryside, looking for a suitable alternative. "There's an old line cabin about a mile off the main trail," he shouted over the drumming of rain on the canvas. "Used by cowboys during roundup, might be our best option in this weather." Hannah poked her head through the wagon's front opening, her face framed by the canvas. "Whatever you think is best, I trust your judgment." Those simple words, "I trust your judgment," affected Sam more deeply than he could have anticipated. Trust was a rare commodity in his world, especially from someone who had known him for such a short time. He felt a surge of determination to prove worthy of that trust, to see Hannah safely to her destination, no matter what obstacles they encountered. The line cabin, when they finally reached it, was crude but sound, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough plank floor, and sturdy walls that kept out the wind and rain. Sam helped Hannah inside before seeing to the horses, making sure they were sheltered beneath a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. When he returned, soaking wet from his efforts, he found Hannah had already started a fire in the fireplace using the wood stacked beside it, and was unpacking provisions from the supplies they'd brought in from the wagon. "You're drenched," she observed, concern evident in her voice. "You should change into dry clothes before you catch your death." Sam nodded, retrieving his saddlebag from where he'd dropped it by the door. The cabin's single room offered no privacy for changing, and he hesitated, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation. Hannah sensed his discomfort and turned to busy herself with the fire, her back to him. "I won't look," she promised, a hint of amusement in her tone. "Though after carrying me for 3 days, I would think modesty between us would be somewhat redundant." Despite the chill of his wet clothing, Sam felt warmth rise to his face. "That was different," he muttered, quickly changing into dry clothes while Hannah kept her word and remained focused on the fire. "There," he announced when he was decent once more. "Much better." Hannah turned, a smile playing at her lips as she took in his dry but rumpled appearance. "You look like a drowned rat who found a towel," she teased, approaching him with unexpected boldness to smooth a strand of damp hair from his forehead. The casual touch sent a jolt through Sam that was anything but casual. His breath caught as her fingers lingered near his temple, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that mirrored his own feelings. "Hannah," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes." She whispered, making no move to step away. What he might have said or done in that moment remained unknown, as a tremendous crack of thunder directly overhead startled them both. Hannah jumped, instinctively moving closer to Sam, who found his arms encircling her without conscious thought. They stood that way for several heartbeats, her head against his chest, his arms providing shelter more secure than any cabin walls. When the thunder receded, neither seemed inclined to break the embrace immediately. "I've never been afraid of storms before," Hannah murmured against his shirt, but that was exceptionally loud. "Must have struck something nearby," Sam agreed, reluctantly loosening his hold as she began to step back. "The storm's right on top of us now." As if to confirm his assessment, the rain intensified, drumming on the cabin's roof with renewed vigor. Wind howled through the chimney, causing the fire to dance and flicker. Outside, the horses whinnied nervously in their shelter. "I should check on them," Sam said, moving toward the door. Hannah caught his arm. "Be careful, that lightning sounded dangerously close." Her concern warmed him more effectively than the fire. "I will," he promised. "Won't be long." The storm raged throughout the evening, keeping them confined to the cabin. They made the best of their situation, sharing a simple meal and conversation as the hours passed. With only a small oil lamp and the fireplace for light, the atmosphere was intimate, encouraging confidences that might not have been shared under different circumstances. "What will you do after you've delivered me safely to Utica?" Hannah asked as they sat side by side on a rough bench near the fire, their dinner dishes washed and put away. Sam shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. He had been avoiding thinking about their inevitable parting. "Haven't decided yet. Might head down to the San Pedro Valley. Heard the ranches there are looking for experienced hands. So you'll just move on." Hannah's voice held a note of something he couldn't quite identify: disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "It's what I do," Sam replied, though the words felt hollow even to his own ears. "Been drifting so long, I'm not sure I know how to do anything else." Hannah was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "What if you had a reason to stay?" she finally asked, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it over the storm. Sam turned to look at her profile, illuminated by the firelight. "What kind of reason did you have in mind?" Slowly, Hannah met his gaze, her expression open and vulnerable in a way that made his heart race. "Me," she said simply. "I could be your reason, Sam, if you wanted." The directness of her statement stunned him. In his experience, women, especially educated Eastern women like Hannah, didn't speak so plainly about matters of the heart. Yet here she was, laying her feelings bare with a courage that humbled him. "Hannah," he began, struggling to find the right words, "you hardly know me. A week ago I was a stranger who happened upon you in the desert. And now you're the man who carried me for 3 days to safety," she countered. "The man who's shown me nothing but respect and kindness. The man who makes me feel both protected and strong at the same time." She placed her hand over his where it rested on the bench between them. "I may not know everything about you, Sam Orton, but I know enough to be certain of what I feel." Sam closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by emotions he'd kept at bay for years. "It's not that simple," he said, though his hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. "You have your teaching position, your plans for the school. I have no permanent home, no steady income." "Those are practical concerns," Hannah acknowledged. "And they matter, certainly, but they're not insurmountable if we both want to overcome them." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you want to, Sam?" Did he? The question echoed in his mind as he gazed at the remarkable woman beside him. A week ago, his life had been simple, uncomplicated by thoughts of the future or connections to anyone. Now, he couldn't imagine returning to that solitary existence, not after knowing Hannah. Yes, he admitted, the truth of it surprising him even as he spoke. God help me, I do. The smile that illuminated her face was worth any uncertainty the future might hold. Without another word, Sam leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, years of loneliness falling away as they found in each other something neither had known they were seeking. When they finally parted, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against Hannah's. "I'm not good at this," he confessed, "at letting people get close, at staying in one place." "Then we'll learn together," Hannah replied, her hands framing his face. "One day at a time." Outside, the storm began to abate, the rain softening to a gentle patter on the roof. Inside, Sam and Hannah remained by the fire, talking well into the night, making tentative plans, sharing hopes and fears, and discovering the profound relief that comes from finding someone who accepts you exactly as you are. The remaining 2 days of their journey to Utica passed in a blur of newfound happiness. Though nothing had been formally decided between them, an understanding had been reached they would face whatever came next together, finding their way as they went. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley where Utica nestled against the foothills, Hannah gasped in delight. The town was larger than she had expected, with a proper main street lined with wooden buildings, a white church steeple rising above the surrounding structures, and the half-completed schoolhouse visible on the eastern edge of the settlement. "It's lovely," she breathed, taking in what would be her new home. "So much greener than I imagined." Sam nodded, seeing the familiar landscape through new eyes. "The creek that runs through the valley makes all the difference." Utica is one of the more prosperous towns in the territory because of it. They made their way down into the valley, the wagon rolling steadily along the well-traveled road. As they approached the town, people began to notice their arrival, several stopping to watch their progress with curious expressions. "Word of your coming has been circulating for weeks," Sam explained. "The new school teacher is big news in a place like this." Hannah straightened her posture, suddenly conscious of making a good first impression. "Do I look presentable?" she asked nervously. "After all we've been through, I must appear rather travel-worn." Sam glanced at her, taking in her neat appearance despite the rigors of their journey. "You look beautiful," he said honestly. "And they'll be too excited about having a teacher to care about a little trail dust." His words bolstered her confidence, and by the time they pulled up in front of the town's small hotel, Hannah was ready to face her new community with her head held high. The hotel owner, Mrs. Peterson, no relation to the man in Coyote Springs, despite sharing a surname, bustled out to greet them. "Miss Taylor, we've been expecting you for days. When you didn't arrive on the stage last week, we feared something might have happened." "Something did happen, Mrs. Peterson," Hannah replied with a smile, accepting Sam's assistance as she climbed down from the wagon. "I ran into a bit of trouble on the trail, but Mr. Orton here came to my rescue." Mrs. Peterson turned her attention to Sam, her expression shifting from polite interest to surprise. "Sam Orton. Well, I'll be. Haven't seen you in these parts for months. Didn't know you were in the business of escorting schoolteachers." Sam tipped his hat, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Special circumstances, Mrs. Peterson. Miss Taylor needed help, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Well, Providence works in mysterious ways," the older woman declared, ushering them toward the hotel entrance. "The school board will want to meet with you immediately, Miss Taylor, but I insist you rest first." "You look exhausted, poor dear." Hannah glanced back at Sam, reluctant to be separated from him so soon after their arrival. He nodded encouragingly. "Go on," he said. "Get settled. I'll see to the wagon and horses. You'll come find me later?" she asked, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Count on it," he promised. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Hannah met with the school board, toured the unfinished schoolhouse, and was introduced to what seemed like every resident of Utica. The community welcomed her warmly, clearly excited about the prospect of proper education for their children. Sam, meanwhile, found himself approached by Henry Miller, owner of the largest ranch in the area, and a man he'd worked for occasionally in the past. "Heard you were back in town," Miller said, finding Sam at the livery stable where he was arranging boarding for Thunder. "Got a proposition for you if you're interested." Sam raised an eyebrow, waiting for the older man to continue. "My foreman's retiring end of the month. Moving to California to live with his daughter. Need someone who knows cattle and can handle men." Miller studied Sam thoughtfully. "Always thought you had the makings of a good foreman, Orton, just never figured you for the settling type." "Wasn't," Sam admitted. "Things change." Miller's shrewd gaze softened with understanding. "Heard you brought in our new schoolteacher, rescued her from some trouble on the trail." Sam nodded, not elaborating. "She have anything to do with these changes you mentioned?" A faint smile played at Sam's lips. "Might do," Miller chuckled. "Thought as much." "Well, offer stands if you're interested. Position comes with the use of the old Peterson Place small house and 10 acres. Previous foreman never used it, preferred to stay in the bunkhouse, but it's part of the deal." The mention of a house, a real home, caught Sam's attention in a way it never would have before. "I'll think on it," he promised. "Don't think too long," Miller advised. "Need someone in place by month's end." As preparations for the Independence Day celebration consumed the town, Sam and Hannah found themselves caught up in the excitement despite their private concerns about the future. They managed to steal moments together between Hannah's meetings and Sam's considerations of Miller's offer, their connection deepening with each passing day. The morning of July 4th dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the planned festivities. The town square had been transformed overnight, with bunting and flags decorating every available surface. Long tables were set up for the community picnic, and a wooden platform had been erected for speeches and later, for dancing. Hannah, dressed in a new blue dress with white trim that she'd purchased from the general store, met Sam outside the hotel. He looked different than she was accustomed to seeing him, clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing a proper suit jacket over his usual shirt and trousers. "You look very handsome," she said by way of greeting, taking his offered arm. "Feel like I'm wearing a costume," Sam admitted, tugging at his collar. But Mrs. Peterson insisted it was appropriate for the occasion. "Well, I appreciate the effort," Hannah replied, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Though I must say I've grown rather fond of your usual cowboy appearance." They joined the gathering crowd in the square, where Mayor Wilson was preparing to give the traditional Independence Day address. As they found seats near the back of the assembled chairs, Hannah noticed several young children staring at her with undisguised curiosity. "My future students," she whispered to Sam. "They've been following me around town all week, though none have been brave enough to approach directly." Sam chuckled. "Can't blame them for being curious. New teacher from back east, probably expecting a stern old spinster with a ruler for rapping knuckles." "Well, I do believe in discipline," Hannah replied primly, though her eyes danced with humor, "but perhaps not the knuckle-rapping variety." Mayor Wilson's speech was mercifully brief, focusing on the town's growth and promising future, before yielding the platform to Pastor Jenkins for the blessing of the meal. As the community lined up for the picnic feast, Sam guided Hannah toward a quieter spot beneath one of the large oak trees that dotted the square. "Before things get too hectic," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you." Hannah's heart quickened at his tone. "Yes, Miller offered me the foreman position at his ranch," Sam began, watching her face carefully for her reaction. "It's a good job, steady, comes with a small house and some land." Hannah's eyes widened slightly, hope rising within her. "That sounds wonderful, Sam. Are you considering accepting?" "I am," he confirmed. "But before I do, I need to know something." He took both her hands in his gaze intense. "We've talked around this, Hannah, made plans in a general way, but I need to be sure we understand each other." "What do you mean?" she asked, though she thought she knew what was coming. Sam took a deep breath. "If I take this job, if I settle here in Utica, it would be for you, because of what I feel for you. And I need to know if that's what you want too, if you see a future for us together." Hannah squeezed his hands, her heart full to bursting with emotion. "Yes, Sam, that's exactly what I want. I love you. I know it's fast, and perhaps it seems impossible given how little time we've known each other." But he silenced her with a kiss, heedless of the townspeople who might be watching. When they parted, his smile was more open and unguarded than she'd ever seen it. "I love you too," he said simply. "Have since somewhere between carrying you across that God-forsaken desert and watching you build a fire in that line cabin during the storm." Hannah laughed, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes. "We're quite the pair, aren't we? The drifting cowboy and the Boston schoolteacher, finding each other in the middle of nowhere." "Providence works in mysterious ways," Sam quoted Mrs. Peterson, his expression turning more serious. "Hannah, I'm not asking for anything formal yet. We both need time to settle into our new roles here. But I want you to know that when the time is right, I intend to ask you to be my wife." The directness of his statement took her breath away. "And when the time is right, I intend to accept," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. Their moment of private understanding was interrupted by Mrs. Peterson's voice calling from near the picnic tables. "Miss Taylor, Mr. Orton, come and get some food before the Miller boys eat it all." Laughing, they rejoined the celebration, their hearts lighter than either could remember feeling in years. Throughout the day, they participated in the various activities: the sack races for the children, the pie judging contest, the impromptu baseball game on the edge of town. As the sun began to set, lanterns were lit around the square, and the local fiddle player took his place on the platform, signaling the start of the dancing. "May I have this dance, Miss Taylor?" Sam asked formally, extending his hand. Hannah placed her hand in his, a smile illuminating her face. "I thought you didn't dance, Mr. Orton." "For you, I'm willing to learn," he replied as he led her to the makeshift dance floor. As they moved together to the lively tune, somewhat awkwardly at first but with increasing confidence, Hannah reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them to this moment. Had her horse not been struck by a rattlesnake, had she not collapsed on that trail, had Sam not happened along at precisely the right time, none of this would be happening. Her near tragedy had led to the greatest happiness she'd ever known. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes being lost is the only way to be found," Hannah replied, her eyes meeting his with profound understanding. As the fiddle transitioned to a slower waltz, Sam pulled her closer, their movements synchronizing perfectly despite his limited experience with dancing. Around them, the community of Utica continued their celebration, unaware that in their midst, a new beginning was taking place, a love story born in the harshest circumstances, now blossoming under the stars of an Independence Day sky. The weeks following the Independence Day celebration passed in a blur of activity for both Sam and Hannah. She threw herself into preparing for the school's opening in September, working with the town's carpenters to finish the schoolhouse and developing a curriculum that would serve students of varying ages and abilities. Sam, meanwhile, began his new role as foreman of the Miller Ranch, earning the respect of the Cowboys under his supervision and implementing improvements that impressed even the demanding Mr. Miller. The small house that came with Sam's position needed considerable work, having stood empty for several years. In the evenings after their respective responsibilities were completed, Hannah would often join Sam there, helping to clean, repair, and make the modest structure into a home. Though propriety dictated that Hannah maintain her room at the hotel until they were married, these hours spent working side by side cemented their bond and confirmed their vision of a shared future. By early August, Hannah had enrolled 23 students for the coming school year, ranging in age from 6 to 16. The schoolhouse was completed, with fresh paint, sturdy desks crafted by the local carpenter, and a small but growing collection of books for the school library, many donated by townspeople eager to support their new teacher. "It's really happening," Hannah marveled one evening as she and Sam sat on the porch of what would soon be their home, watching the sunset paint the valley in hues of gold and crimson. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it, the school, this place, us." Sam nodded, understanding her sense of wonder. For a man who had spent most of his adult life avoiding attachments, the contentment he felt in putting down roots was both surprising and profound. "Feels right, though, doesn't it?" "It does," Hannah agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Though my parents might need some convincing. I received a letter from them yesterday. They're still hoping I'll come to my senses and return to Boston once the novelty of frontier life wears off." Sam chuckled. "And will you? Come to your senses, I mean?" Hannah turned to face him, her expression serious despite his teasing tone. "I've never been more sensible in my life, Sam Orton. Everything I was searching for, everything I couldn't find in Boston, I've found here with you." The simple honesty of her declaration moved him deeply. Without words, he drew her into his arms, their kiss conveying what neither needed to say aloud, that what they'd found in each other was rare and precious. A love neither had expected, but both now cherished above all else. As summer faded into fall, Hannah's school opened to great fanfare from the community. The first day found her standing nervously before her students, 23 young faces regarding her with expressions ranging from excitement to skepticism to outright apprehension. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "My name is Miss Taylor, and I am honored to be your teacher. We have much to learn together this year, but first, I'd like to learn about each of you." By the end of that first day, Hannah was exhausted but exhilarated. The children had responded well to her gentle but firm approach, and she'd already identified those who would need extra attention, like shy little Emma Collins, who could barely speak above a whisper, and mischievous Thomas Miller, the youngest son of Sam's employer, whose quick mind clearly needed greater challenges than the standard curriculum might provide. When she shared these observations with Sam that evening, his pride in her was evident. "You found your calling," he said simply. "Those children are lucky to have you." As the weeks passed, a rhythm developed to their lives. Hannah taught during the day while Sam managed the ranch operations. Evenings were spent together, sometimes with friends from town, but often just the two of them, planning their future and growing closer with each passing day. By mid-October, the house was fully renovated, and Sam finally raised the question they'd both been anticipating. It happened on a Sunday afternoon following church services. They had ridden to a scenic overlook above the valley, a spot Sam had discovered during his previous stays in the area. The autumn air was crisp, the surrounding hills ablaze with the changing colors of the season. "Do you remember the day I found you in the desert?" Sam asked as they sat side by side on a fallen log, gazing out at the landscape below. Hannah nodded, her hand finding his. "How could I forget? I was certain I was going to die out there." "I knew the moment I saw you that you were someone special," Sam continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Even half dead from thirst, there was something about you that called to me, I suppose." "As I recall, I wasn't at my most charming," Hannah teased gently. "Unconscious, sunburned, and delirious doesn't typically make a favorable first impression." Sam smiled, turning to face her more directly. "You survived what would have killed most people. That kind of strength, that determination, it's rare, Hannah, as rare as what we've found together." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box, simple but elegant. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment," he admitted, opening it to reveal a modest gold ring set with a single pearl. "It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Hannah whispered, her eyes filling with tears as she recognized the significance of the moment. "Sam, Hannah Taylor," he said, taking her hand in his, "will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here, teach our children alongside the towns, grow old with me in that little house in the valley?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "Yes, Sam, I will." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her. As they sealed their promise with a kiss, Hannah marveled at how far she had come from that desperate moment on the desert trail. What had begun as the most frightening experience of her life had led to the greatest joy she had ever known. Their wedding took place in the Utica church on the first Saturday in November, with the entire town in attendance. Hannah wore a new dress of ivory silk ordered specially from Tucson, and Sam, despite his protests, donned a proper suit for the occasion. Pastor Jenkins officiated, his weathered face beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife before their new community. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with food, music, and dancing in the town hall. When the newly wedded couple finally departed for their home, they were sent off with cheers, well wishes, and the traditional shower of rice for good fortune. Alone at last in the house they had prepared together, Sam took Hannah in his arms, the realization that she was now his wife and he her husband still something of a wonder to them both. "Happy, Mrs. Orton?" he asked, his voice tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied, her eyes shining with love and promise. As they began their life together that night, neither could have foreseen all that the future would hold, the challenges they would face, the joys they would share, the family they would build. But of one thing they were certain. Whatever came their way, they would face it together, their bond forged in the crucible of those 3 desperate days in the desert when a drifting cowboy carried a half-dead schoolteacher to safety, and in doing so, found the way home they had both been seeking all along. In the years that followed, Utica prospered, as did the Ortons. Hannah's school flourished, gaining recognition throughout the territory for its innovative methods and the success of its students. Sam's management of the Miller Ranch proved so effective that when the older man decided to retire in 1882, he offered Sam the opportunity to purchase the operation, an offer made possible by the careful savings they had accumulated, and a loan from the newly established Territorial Bank. Their family grew as well. In 1879, Hannah gave birth to their first child, a son they named William after Sam's father. A daughter, Emily, named for Sam's lost sister, followed in 1881, and another son, James, completed their family in 1884. The children grew up in a home filled with books and learning, but also with the practical knowledge of ranch life, a combination of their parents' different backgrounds and shared values. Hannah's parents eventually overcame their reservations about her Western life and visited Utica in 1880, staying for nearly 3 months. By the time they departed, even Hannah's proper Boston father had developed a grudging respect for Sam and an undeniable affection for his grandson. They returned twice more before age and health prevented further travel, but the family maintained a regular correspondence that bridged the physical distance between them. As Utica grew from a small settlement into a proper town, Sam and Hannah remained at its heart, he as one of the community's leading citizens and successful ranchers, she as the beloved teacher who educated an entire generation of the town's children. When a proper school board was established in 1885, Hannah was appointed as the district's first superintendent, a position that allowed her to implement her educational philosophies on a broader scale while training new teachers to carry on her work. Their home on the ranch became known for its hospitality, open to travelers, newcomers to the territory, and friends alike. The Orton Christmas gatherings became a tradition, with the house filled to overflowing with guests, music, and laughter. Hannah often remarked that the home's crowded, joyful chaos was the furthest thing from the formal, restrained Boston society she had left behind, and exactly the life she had been seeking without knowing it. Though the years brought their share of hardships, drought seasons that threatened the ranch, a scarlet fever outbreak that closed the school for weeks and claimed the lives of 2 of Hannah's students, the inevitable losses that come with time's passage, Sam and Hannah faced each challenge with the same resilience and partnership that had marked their relationship from the beginning. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, surrounded by their children, friends, and the community they had helped to build, Sam presented Hannah with a journal bound in soft leather. "What's this?" she asked, opening the cover to find pages filled with his surprisingly elegant handwriting. "Our story," Sam explained, unusually emotional. "From the day I found you in the desert to the day William was born, thought it might be worth preserving for our grandchildren someday." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she read the opening lines. "I wasn't looking for anything that day, just making my way back to Utica after a job. But fate had other plans when I found her collapsed on the trail, more dead than alive from thirst. I carried her for 3 days to safety, not knowing I was carrying my own future in my arms." Looking up at the man who had become the center of her world, Hannah felt the same rush of love and gratitude that had overwhelmed her during those first days of their acquaintance. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching for his hand, "for everything, for saving my life, for giving me this life." Sam brought her hand to his lips, his eyes conveying what words could never fully express. "Thank you for being worth carrying," he replied simply. Around them, the life they had built together continued its gentle rhythm, their children laughing with friends, neighbors sharing stories of the season's events, the community they loved thriving in the valley that had become their home. From the desperate beginning of their journey to this moment of reflection, 20 years later, Sam and Hannah Orton had discovered the most profound truth of all, that sometimes the greatest distances we travel are measured not in miles, but in the journey from solitude to connection, from being lost to being found. And as the evening stretched into night, with the stars shining over the valley just as they had on that first night when a cowboy had built a fire in the desert to save a dying woman, Sam and Hannah stood together on the porch of their home, hands intertwined, hearts still beating as one, 2 souls who had found in each other everything they hadn't known they were seeking, and more than either had dared to dream possible.